The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. Welcome to The Best Birth, a podcast where we invite experts to help elevate your birth.
Today on our show, we have Meagan Heaton. Meagan is a VBAC after 2 cesareans mom. She's also a birth doula and educator and the founder of the VBAC Link.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining our show.
Yes, and I am so excited to learn from you and your expertise. The VBAC Link is the #1 resource in VBAC education, and I understand that you have a podcast with over 300 episodes and a flourishing community for mamas preparing for vaginal births after cesareans. So we'd love to just dive right in and hear a little bit of your story and what brought you to creating the VBAC Link.
Yes, well, thank you again for having me. I love talking about VBAC. Clearly, I talk about it every week on the podcast, and I'm just really passionate because I've been through it, right? And so, yeah, let me tell you more about my story, which is kind of really where the VBAC Link began. So, like you said, I have had 2 C-sections. With my first baby, I was young. I got pregnant and I downloaded like What to Expect or something like that on on my phone, and I kind of just let that app be my education and be, the leading thing for me to understand what was happening not only to my body, but to my baby, what size my baby was, what I was going to be experiencing, all those things. And I always was shocked when I wasn't experiencing everything on the app, because I'm like, wait, isn't this supposed to be telling me what I'm supposed to be experiencing? Just gonna give you some tip right now. Don't only go off of an app for childbirth education or your pregnancy education. It's just not great. It's fine, but it's not great.
And there can never be enough education.
There really can't be enough education, and that's the hardest part that I had to kind of learn, is I thought I had all the education I needed right there in my little app because it was telling me everything, right? And then there was a forum in the app, so that was cool. I was kind of seeing people, relating to people. So I kind of just went off of that and found myself at 39 weeks, 5 days, and my water broke. And I was super excited. I mean, who's not excited when that water breaks? Because that is a sure sign that your baby is coming, right? But I didn't really have a lot of things happening. Like, I was kind of cramping every time I would get a contraction that I didn't even really realize was a contraction. I'd get a little bit more leakage, but that was about all I experienced after my water broke. But what I was told is if your water breaks, you go straight to the hospital. And now I know better, but that's what I did. I went right to the hospital. Super excited. We got our bags. We went in, and I was like, maybe a 1, maybe a ½ centimeter. And they were just like, okay, here's your room. And they just put us in this room. And I remember just kind of hanging out, thinking, okay, what's going on? What do we do? And so I just sat in the bed, and things did start to kind of pick up. And within time, they came in and they wanted to do another cervical exam, and I hadn't progressed super far. And again, hours and hours went by, finally checked again, and I was 3 centimeters, which seemed like really great progress. I went in, I say it was around midnight. My water broke around midnight, and then we went in around 1 or so, and it was noon. And I was 3 centimeters and starting to finally feel contractions, and they were like, nah, this isn't happening. This isn't good. And I was like, wait, what? So they put me on Pitocin, and they were like, we have to get this labor going. So I started Pitocin, and oh my gosh, was not prepared for that. That little app did not prepare me for Pitocin. Pitocin is definitely, it's a synthetic hormone that gets pumped into our body to help our uterus contract. And that's exactly what it did. So I started contracting stronger, and I just wasn't prepared. I didn't know how to breathe. I didn't know how to cope. My husband didn't know anything. He definitely wasn't reading my What to Expect app. And so I found myself like clinging to the bed, like telling him, do something. So I ended up getting an epidural, and, I wasn't dilating. And my doctor just said, this isn't happening. I think that we need to have a C-section. And I just said, okay. And that's not what I wanted. I actually had talked to him about C-section in my prenatal just a little bit because my mom had a C-section with me, coincidentally enough with the same provider. So my provider was the guy who helped me get here. So anyway, I just didn't know what else to do. And my husband was like, we got to do this. Like, if this is what they say, we got to do it. So I said, okay. So they unhooked my bed and wheeled my bed down to the OR, and I had a C-section. Okay. And, it wasn't necessarily a bad experience. On my podcast, I definitely hear some trauma stories in regards to C-section, and mine fortunately wasn't necessarily traumatic, but it wasn't what I wanted. I didn't necessarily want that. So anyway, I went in and did recovery and started already thinking about what I wanted to do for baby number 2. And so I did. I just started kind of researching and learned about a doula, but I wasn't even pregnant. So I just kind of was like, okay, cool. No, I actually didn't learn about a doula yet. I learned about VBAC. That's what I learned about. Just like the VBAC was an option. And I was like, cool, well, I'm not pregnant, so we'll figure it out later. So then I started thinking, okay, I want to get pregnant. So I talked to my OB and said, hey, I want a VBAC when I get pregnant. He's like, yeah, cool, no problem. So I got pregnant, and I was with my OB, and he was super supportive, saying he's like, yeah, that's no problem. And I was like, cool. If you support VBAC, that's a thumbs up for me. And so then I started digging more and found out about a doula late in pregnancy. And I remember, oh my gosh, we were at a restaurant, and I told my husband, I want a doula. And he got like irate. He was like, no, you are not going to replace me. And I was like, no, it's not like that, which is a very common myth of doulas, is them being, replacing our partner and our loved ones. And that's not the case, but he just wasn't super sure about that. So he went out of town. It was 38 weeks, like 4 days or something like that. And he went out of town for work. And guess what? My water broke again. So I was kind of okay with it, though. I was like, that's fine. It'll be fine. My husband will make it back. I'm planning on laboring at home as long as possible anyway. I'm not rushing to the providers this time. And so anyway, he got home, and he was like, why aren't you at the hospital? Your water broke hours ago. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm like barely contracting. And he's like, no, we gotta go. And my mom was like, you gotta go. So I ended up just saying, okay. So we went to the hospital. And again, not really dilated, but it really wasn't contracting. So that's a big key that I just want to mention. Like, if your body is not contracting, we cannot expect to be dilated. We just can't, right? Like, and you could be dilated a little bit before labor. We know that, but like, we're not going to be like dilated really far. Like, we're not going to be having a baby. So if I'm not contracting, I shouldn't be worried about having a baby in the car or something, because I'm not even contracting. So anyway, my body doesn't dilate before labor, like a lot of people's kind of, 1 to 4 centimeters, people can kind of dilate and start softening. So I went in, and they were like, you're maybe a 1. I was like, awesome. Great. Here we are. And, my nurse was amazing. She was also a doula. And so she was like helping me. When I did have contractions, I would have them in my back, which was a sign that, my baby was maybe not positioned very well. And my husband was exhausted. He like crashed. He's like, oh, I made it. And like fell asleep in the little chair in the corner. And so her and I just kind of chatted and did labor a little bit, and yeah, I just didn't really dilate. I was begging for Pitocin. I was like, can I have Pitocin? Can I do something to help this labor? Because they were kind of saying like, oh, if this doesn't happen, then it's going to need to be a repeat C-section, right? And so she asked, and my provider said no to Pitocin, said it was a contraindication, which we'll talk about later. And yeah, just kind of let me hang. I just didn't do much. And shift change happened at 7 a.m., you know, as it does often in hospitals. And my amazing nurse went away, and an amazing nurse came in, but wasn't the nurse I needed. She was like, all right, let's just have a C-section. Provider wants a C-section. He came in. He was kind of negative, kind of said, like, your body doesn't know how to do this. It can't do this. You just need a section, is what he kept saying. And I was like, I don't want that. Can you just give me an hour? And I never felt a contraction again after that. My body went into like freeze mode where everything just stopped. So I walked around for an hour trying to get labor to go, and it just didn't go. And finally my husband was like, can we just have a baby? You know, and he was kind of putting some fear into my husband. He was kind of saying some scary things. And so anyway, I walked down and I had a repeat C-section. And honestly, that birth was so healing in a way. It was not the birth I wanted, right? I really wanted a vaginal birth, but I got to be included in that birth so much. I got to watch my C-section, which I know isn't for everybody, but that was like really healing for me to really be included in what was happening and see in the mirror my baby coming up, right? So it was really good. It was good. Like overall, I really felt at peace with my birth. I was really grateful for my husband for remembering some of those things, like wanting to watch it and wanting to be part of it and having music and having just a better experience than just like being in a bright room with beeping, you know? And so anyway, so I had her, and I was in the recovery room, the post-op room. And I was breastfeeding her and just like smitten over this little baby, and started Googling how to become a doula. My priorities may not have been in the right place. I may have been a little distracted over here, but I did. I started Googling how to become a doula, and everything inside of me just lit on fire. And I was like, 1, I'm going to become a doula, and 2, I'm going to VBAC one day. I'm going to do this. So I decided to become a doula before I even left the hospital. I registered for my course and then enjoyed my little newborn, and started my journey right away. And I wasn't expecting that. Sometimes I have a little bit of mom guilt. You know how we get mom guilt sometimes, where I'm like, oh man, I should have probably spent more time with my newborn than like being distracted about a baby that wasn't even born yet or supporting people that I didn't even know yet. But I don't know, it's just where my mind went. I think maybe too, it was a little bit of processing, you know, the birth that I didn't get. So anyway, years later, I was already a doula. I was loving it. It was so fun. VBAC was definitely like a big thing for me, and I just wanted to learn more. So not only did I want to learn more for my clients, right? I wanted to learn more for me too. And so I just dove head first, started learning all the things about VBAC, the risks, the facts, really what does it look like? Does that big rupture word that they say really have like a really high rate, or is it low? You know, what are we doing? Anyway, and what I learned is a lot of positive things, actually, that VBAC is very safe and reasonable, that yes, uterine rupture, although that word is very, very big and scary, the chances are pretty dang low, like pretty dang low. And I never want to discredit anything or anyone that has had a uterine rupture. And I think that's really important to know, is like they do happen. And when they do happen, they are emergent. When they do happen, it's very rare that it's catastrophic, but they happen. And I don't want to make it sound like it's so low that they don't happen, because they do. But with the rate being as low as it was, I felt very confident in trying again, and going for it. So I interviewed a ridiculous amount of providers, maybe 12 might be my number, which might sound crazy, but I really, really, really wanted to find a provider that would support, truly support. And that, I think, is a big key when it comes to VBAC and wanting a VBAC, is you have to find a provider that supports you. And there's a difference between like someone who is like, my first one, oh yeah, no problem, you can do it, to like actually being supportive. Right? And so I wanted to find someone who would tell me both the risks of C-section, repeat C-section, and VBAC. Because when we're talking VBAC, people only focus on VBAC. They don't talk about the risks of repeat C-section, which there are many. And we just don't talk about them, right? It's like, oh, it's fine. So, but VBAC is scary. And so I wanted someone to really give me both, because I wanted to know both my risks of both outcomes, knowing that VBAC could also lead to a C-section. I wanted to know that risk if I go in for a scheduled C-section versus a VBAC or a TOLAC, right, going into a C-section. So I didn't want a yes or no answer. I wanted to know how they felt about VBAC. How do you feel about VBAC? So if you are listening and you are interested in a VBAC, that is something I highly suggest you ask your provider, how they feel about VBAC. You're going to know within about a split 2 seconds how they feel and if they're really supportive. If they're like, oh my gosh, I love VBAC, it's so great, this is what's going on, these are the pros, these are the cons, right? And they're breaking it down, that's great. If they're like, it's fine, you can do it, but you have to go into labor spontaneously. You can't go past 40 weeks. If your water breaks, you have to come right in and be on a monitor. All of these restrictions, those are not so supportive answers, right? If they have a bunch of restrictions on you. So I did find a lot of those providers that put a lot of restrictions. And then I had some that I was like, okay, I could see you being supportive, but I'm going to kind of like keep going. And so I finally found a provider who was awesome. And at the time here in Utah, he was like the VBAC king. Like he was the one to support VBAC. And so I was like, done. I'm going to you. You are great. And I did. I started care and he was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. But I attended an out of hospital birth at like probably 20 weeks or so. It was Christmas Eve actually. And this midwife just blew me away. And I was still a newer doula, so I hadn't seen a ton of out of hospital births at that point. And I just said after the birth, I said, can I come see you after the holidays? Like I would love to discuss my birth plans with you. She was like, yeah, no problem. So I went in and decided to switch at 24 weeks care. And I actually did some dual care. I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of dual care?
Yes. So you see your physician or your OBGYN, and then you also see your midwife to plan to deliver at a place other than your hospital.
Exactly. So I did dual care and for a little bit. And I think that it just kind of helped my heart feel like it was okay. Like I had a backup plan, right? Which I actually think no matter what, especially if you're giving birth out of the hospital and VBACing or not even VBACing, you should have a backup plan. I think that's important. So I started care with her and it was just amazing. And I felt so supportive. And then as a doula, I had a couple doulas that were like, hey, I want to be at your birth really bad. So I started really getting this team and this village surrounding me and building me up. And unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of support from family members with the idea to VBAC in general, and then two for sure out of hospital. So I like kind of toyed with it and just like said some things about out of hospital. And I had one person like, you can't do that. And I was like, okay, I will not be sharing my plan. So I kind of kept my plan to myself and my team. And I think that's okay to protect your space if you have, some maybe outside negativity coming in, or lack of support. And I want to note too, because my family, it's not that they didn't support me, it's that they were uneducated. They didn't know, right? And so they weren't bad for not supporting me. They didn't know the facts. They only heard the scary stuff that they heard. And so I don't judge them for ever not supporting me or anything like that. It's usually the case with a lot of people. They just don't know what they don't know. So anyway, yeah, fast forward, my water breaks again. Go me. They say 10% of people have their water break, but I 3 for 3. So my water broke, and labor definitely took its time. Really took its time. We had a posterior situation again where my baby was in my back looking forward. So baby's head against my back. And so we had to work really hard to do that with motions and movement and resting and all the things. But we ended up 42 hours later on a squat stool on a bathroom floor, which sounds kind of crazy. But I was on a stool with everyone surrounded around me, my husband holding me behind me, my midwife in front of me, my doula's on the side of me. And I, in 2 sets of pushes, I should say, pushed my little guy out after being told I would never get a baby out of my pelvis, right? And that my body didn't know how to dilate. I was told those 2 things, and not only told them, it was put on my op report that my pelvis was too small to physically get a baby out. And so I had my VBAC, and it was just the most amazing feeling, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. We were all crying. A lot of the doula community was following my story because I was pretty vocal in the community because I felt very supported in that community. And this amazing woman, Julie Frankum, she called me one day out of the blue and said, "Hey, I want to start a company with you. I want to call it Utah VBAC Link." And I was like, that sounds cool. Let's do it. And I did make her wait a little bit. I had to think about it. But we did it, and that's where the VBAC Link started. So it actually started as Utah VBAC Link. And as we started, we found that there was such a bigger need. There was such a bigger need outside of Utah. So then the VBAC Link was born, and we started a podcast, an education course, and love talking VBAC.
Meagan, our hearts are exploding.
Yes, to hear that. I have been told so many times your pelvis is too small. And so I have just been in the mode of accepting cesarean and never really considered that was an option because of what I've been told. So I love that you were told something and then you questioned it and you sought more education. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I want to tell you, you are not alone, love. With a cesarean rate at 32.1% just a couple years ago, think about how many of us have been told our pelvis is too small, your body doesn't know how to do it, your babies are just too big, you just make too big of babies, things like that, right? Like we were told that. And when we are told that by a medical professional who did years of schooling, we can't blame ourselves for believing that. We can't, right? Like I'm not a professional. So, yeah.
Well, and tell us, what were some of the things that you did to prepare for your VBAC so you felt that confidence because you were receiving a message that might have diminished your confidence?
Oh, such a good question. And let me tell you, even after preparing, I might have had a little trigger during labor, actually. I triggered back a little bit and started doubting myself. So one, I got my op reports. That is a really big first step for anyone who has had a cesarean or cesareans who may want to explore the option of VBAC. That is a really big thing because we are often told one thing and in our op reports documented another, which is kind of weird to think about why we would be told something and documented another, but it does happen. And so we want to know really what happened in that cesarean. What are the reasons that they're saying these cesareans happened, right? Was it a fetal heart drop? Was it our pelvis? Was it something else, right? So getting my op reports, that is the first thing I did to prepare. And I went through them. Now, at that point, I was a doula, and so I had a better knowledge of what the terms went and things like that. But that's something we do at the VBAC Link too. We help people go through those op reports and understand what is being said and what was done. So understanding what they said, I think that's a really, really big first key. And then I think acceptance. I had to accept that those happened. Those C-sections happened. And I think that through that acceptance, I actually found gratitude and being really grateful for my body. A lot of people, when they doubt their body, they think negatively. My body wasn't strong enough. My body didn't do it. My body wasn't, created correctly or whatever, grew correctly to do this. Like, it's really hard what we can do, I think, as women in general, but when we're told these things by our providers, it's hard to put those things in our mind. So acceptance, be grateful for your body, and then start educating. So I started educating and really learning about those risks and learning about what the signs were of uterine rupture and, the risks of cesarean and, learning more also about my body and what the pelvis actually does in labor. Now, you guys, our pelvises are incredible. I actually have a pelvis right here. I just want to show you.
Oh, this is perfect. I'm so glad that you have a demonstration.
I do. And this is like, I have a little guy right here. So this one doesn't move as much. But look at this amazing bone structure that we have in our bodies. It does so much for us, right? We sit, we lay, we stand, we run, we jump, all the things. Guess what? It also births babies really well. But if we have any weird abnormality, so my pelvis specifically, don't know why, just does it, but my pelvis, I'm going to turn it this way so you can kind of see. My pelvis does this. This. My left hip goes forward. Can you kind of see that hole?
Yeah.
Okay, so my left goes forward all the time, and my right sits back. And then my sacrum, can you see what happens to my sacrum? It tucks under and twists. So when we are trying to get a baby out, I'm going to use my little one here. We're trying to get a baby out of this little space, and we have twisted things. Look what that space does. It makes us so much smaller, right? So we can't get a baby out as well when our pelvis is wonky like this, because our babies have to come down and rotate to come out. And so when everything's tucked and wrong, it just makes it hard. So I started chiropractic care. I was a little weary of chiropractors. I was like, they're quacks. That's what I said. I was like, they're a little quacky. But through my research of things to do with VBAC, I really found a benefit of chiropractors. So I started with chiropractor, and sure enough, he said, your left goes forward, your back goes back, your sacrum's all twisted. We got to keep on this. And when we're pregnant, we make extra relaxin hormones, and so our pelvis can get out of whack a little easier. Then it can make it so the baby can come down a little wonky. And when the floodgates open like my births, babies just come, and they can come down in all wonky positions, right? So that's another thing I learned. I'm more about positioning of babies. What the signs were that a baby was in a lack of term of, I should say, poor position, okay? And what to do. So as soon as with my water broke with my third, when all my contractions were in my back, I knew, oh my gosh, he's posterior. And then I also learned, oh my gosh, Lila, my second, was posterior too. So one, I didn't have time to get into labor with that one. I just wasn't given the time. But two, she needed work to help get on the cervix, right? Because if our baby's heads are not pressing on the cervix correctly, that's hard. So look, here's another thing. You can see that big part of the head, small part of the head. if our baby's head's right here on the cervix, can you see how less pressure is being put on our cervix because there's less head, right? So positioning, that's another thing I learned to prep. And then really mentally and physically. So I was eating better. I was staying hydrated. I was trying to work out and walk and stay physically fit. I was really trying to focus on my nutrients, making sure that I was giving my body and my baby the things that it needed to grow a healthy baby. So those were all the things I needed to prep as well. And then finding those doulas, finding that provider, those were all really, really key factors in my prep as well.
And I remember learning, because I have a very similar story to you, although I only had one cesarean before my VBAC, my second baby, but both births were actually posterior. And so for my second birth, we actually went to the chiropractor an hour before he was born, and that was 28 hours into my labor. And so I feel like a chiropractor is the reason that I was able to have that VBAC, because he was able to open my hips and my pelvis in a way that could rotate the baby. But I do want to go back to the malpositioning. So if a baby is in the wrong position, how do you get the baby in the right position?
Yes, such a good question. And I'm also going to even go a little bit back to what we were talking with the pelvis is too small. Usually when our pelvis is documented too small, or CPD, it's actually a baby's position. And it's more that the baby couldn't fit through in a wonky position, then we just needed work. So what we do is, one, we tune into what's happening. Where's our contractions? So as a doula, I'm paying attention to where those are. Are they all on our back? Are they all up front? Can we sit down comfortably during a contraction, right? But can we sit down? Or when we sit down, are we like forced to crawl to our knees because it's so much pressure in that pubic area, right? Or is it going down one side of the leg? Or are we coupling? So a coupling contraction is where we have two really, really close contractions that were like decent, but maybe not, like didn't floor us, right? And then we have a break, like a pretty solid break. And then we have the strongest contraction where we're like, oh my gosh, this baby's coming. And it takes us out of our focus, and it took everything we had to get through that. And then all of a sudden we have two little ones again, and then a break, and then a strong one. So that's our uterus. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Our bodies are brilliant. And that's our uterus trying to move a baby. So if we're having that coupling pattern, that's telling me we've got to do some work. So a lot of the times it's positioning. So if we're having all of it in our back, we're going to do forward leaning things. Or if we're getting it more in one pelvis, we're going to maybe do some asymmetrical movements and try to find the balance in our pelvis. Maybe we're rotating knees in if our baby's really low, but we're still kind of feeling like maybe baby's asynclitic or something like that. And asynclitic's like where they're tilted like this. So we might rotate our knees in or out, or even do both of them, right? So
do we keep that position for multiple contractions, or do we change with each one?
So good question. I actually like to keep it for 3 to 5 contractions before we shift. And the shift doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to be we're standing up and our knees are all over the place, and then all of a sudden we're laying down and we're doing that. I mean, it can be subtle. It can be like we're leaning over the bed and we're swaying our hips, and then we get a tiny little stool and we're still leaning over the bed, but now our foot's on a stool. So now we're in that asynclitic, we're asymmetrical. Or maybe we're rotating a knee in, or maybe we're rotating a knee out standing up. Or if we're laying down, we don't have to like drive all the way over to the other side. We can just switch our pelvis up a little bit right there, because even just a little, here's my pelvis again, just a little bit of movement. So here, maybe our knees are, vertical. What is that? What's the direction? Straight. We're straight. And then now we tilt the one pelvis up, or one knee up. So then we're making the inlet bigger, right? So we're allowing that space over here. So just little movements is what we need to do. So every 3 to 5, move if you can. Now, if it is absolutely not tolerable to stay in that position, listen to your body. Move, right? Listen to your body.
I think this is a great marriage between showing how science has advanced, and we've had other interventions that we've been able to use, but on the other hand, can we even it out with education and changing the positions and figuring out how to labor and all of those things? I feel like that's kind of what's been missing as we've advanced in science.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I think in a lot of ways we've forgotten about these things like movement and position, and we're not paying attention to those as much as in like, oh, well, the baby hasn't come at this time, so it's time to go for a C-section. Your pelvis must be too small.
Yeah.
And what are some of the questions that we can ask to our providers during labor when it's presented that we might need to have the C-section?
Okay, yeah. So, and one, I think the very first question is why? Why is the reason what's the reason you are suggesting a C-section? Is my baby doing okay? Is everything okay with the baby? If they say, yeah, baby's doing okay. Okay. Am I doing okay? Are my baby or I at risk, serious risk right now? If they say yes, then we have some things to talk about. If they say no, okay, we're okay. So what's the reason? Okay, well, your water has been broken for 18 hours, we'll say. And you're only 5 centimeters, and you've been 5 centimeters for 3 hours. Okay, so it's a progression issue. All right, what are the things we can do before going to the C-section route, right? And ask, have I only not dilated? Is that the only thing that I haven't done? Like, have I effaced? Has my baby come down lower? You know, have there other changes been being made? Because if that's the case, there's really no evidence on that. Like, if we're making change and everyone's doing okay, we can keep going, right? So kind of asking those questions, are we safe? Are we okay? Why? If it's just a progression issue, what other things can we do before we go that route? Can we start introducing Pitocin? Can we get up and move in a different position? And, you know, really kind of ask those questions that they need to answer to you, because it's called consent. So they need to be really telling you what's going on with your body, and before they just say, oh, you have to have a C-section. So asking those questions, what's going on? Are we safe? What can we do? And then you can also say, like, well, in this situation, what have you seen help? Right? And if they just say, oh, a C-section. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily fact. I mean, maybe that's how they're caring, right? And we're realizing that this provider may not be as supportive for VBAC as we thought. But maybe they can say, oh, do you know what I found is that we turn Pitocin off, give your body a break, let your uterine receptors clear out of Pitocin, and start over gradually. Or cut it in half and let your body get a break, and then start progressing that way. Or something like that. Like, okay, let's really talk about options, because if mom and baby are okay, there are typically other things we can do before going the cesarean route. Right.
And what is the rate of cervical change that's required before we might understand that there is a problem or some sort of, like stalling with contractions?
Well, the biggest thing is if our water's broken, there is zero change and it's been like 6 to 12 hours, then we need to be talking about something. Something needs to happen, right? So they can say, at that point, they can say failure to progress or failure to descend, because there's not really anything happening. But like I was saying earlier, if you maybe haven't dilated in 4 hours, which is normal, especially at 4 or 5 centimeters, you're not even in active labor yet, but you went from 30% effaced to 80% effaced, that's significant change. Your body's just been not dilating, but it's been working and softening and thinning. Another question too is asked to how far the cervix has come forward. So a lot of the times in early labor, it's posterior, and it will come forward and align with the birth canal. So you can talk to them about that. So if they're saying there has not been any change, make sure to talk about that change, right? Like in a whole, not just that one number 1 to 10. or 0 to 10. So they can diagnose it as failure to progress, after that 6 to 12 hour mark, usually around 6 hours. If water's broken 6 centimeter or 6 hours and your body has gone into the active phase of labor, meaning 6 centimeters or more, then they're probably going to discuss things.
And one thing, as I was studying for my VBAC, that was really apparent, it takes our bodies a lot of time to get into active labor.
Yes.
And so if your water breaks and you head straight to the hospital and then they put you on a clock, you're kind of doomed, because our bodies take a lot of time for active labor to happen. So in my experience, my chart says that I have failure to progress, but I only dilated to 2 centimeters. I never got beyond that. So I felt like that was kind of a mistake on my chart, because I was never in active labor. My baby was sunny side up. He was in the wrong position. And maybe if we had found out that he was in the wrong position on day 1 of my labor instead of day 2 of my labor, there would have been more time to do the positioning to shift him and then still have a chance for vaginal delivery. And so in my other labors, that was something I noticed, is I felt like I was in labor for a long time, and I would start tracking, and then I would think, okay, it's only been 3 hours of contractions and now they're gone. And every day I remember waking up and thinking, like, I'm still contracting. Why am I not in labor? Like, why hasn't my baby come yet? And it was that realization that it takes our bodies a lot of time to get into active labor. But then once active labor is present, for me, it did not take a long time once my baby was in the right position. And that was for my 3rd labor. My entire labor, I think, was 5 hours from the time that I felt like, okay, these contractions are real, and then delivering that baby.
Yeah, and that's such a good thing to talk about, because I think sometimes when we're looking at length in a whole, it's defeating, because we're like, it's not happening. Why is it not happening? I'm not going to have this baby. But there are so many of those things to look at. Baby's position. Did our water break first? What's been going on? Is our body even contracting enough to be in active labor, right? And so same with me. Like, I was 3 centimeters and was told failure to progress CPD, but I wasn't I wasn't even in labor. I was in labor, but I wasn't in active labor. And that has changed over the years. It used to be 4 centimeters. Now it's 6 centimeters before they consider you in an active stage or of labor. Oh, that's another thing I was going to say. When you asked about what are some things that we can ask to our provider, is if our water has, now this would be an intervention, but if our water has been broken, we're not dilating, they're talking C-section. Sometimes, now it's an intervention and it can reduce some infection and things like that, but sometimes asking, are my contractions adequate enough to be progressing? We can introduce an IUPC, which is an intrauterine pressure catheter that actually tells the strength of the labor. So now this is a way to essentially really manage your labor. So it's like, in those last stitch efforts, but it's something that you can do, because if they put it in and then they're like, oh, your MVUs are way too low, you're not even in adequate labor, then we know why we're not progressing. Right? It might look like on the charts that we're going up and down and we're having really great, beautiful contractions, but our uterus isn't contracting strong enough to get that progress.
Wow. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I have learned a lot myself, and I love that we're able to educate people further on VBACs and the possibility of them and what can be done to get there.
Yeah.
I wanted to go into the mental preparation. So you had talked about what happens if my labor is just like taking forever. How do you help clients, and what do you recommend to stay in that positive state instead of feeling defeated during the process, right? You have to have oxytocin in your body in order for your labor to continue functioning. And I feel like getting defeated and feeling depressed is like the number one way you can kill that oxytocin.
Totally. And I think I kind of talked about it a little bit ago, how in my VBAC labor, I actually triggered back. because I spiraled backwards and I was in my driveway throwing a tantrum. I really wish someone took a video of it so I could like really show people what I mean by throwing a tantrum, but my arms were flying, my head was hanging, I was bawling, I was yelling, and I was like, this isn't gonna happen. I've done everything, and we can get that to that point. And then I had to just gather it all up, throw it away, and be like, I'm not going to let that negativity come over because I know my body's capable. I know I am going to do this. And even if I don't do this, I've done everything I can to be here right now to allow my body to try. And I have to believe in that. Now, I don't know where you find that personally, whether it's meditation, whether it's affirmation, whether it's someone grabbing your face and physically saying, you have got this. And sometimes I do that with my clients. I go head to head and I'm like, because sometimes in labor, we can't see past here. Like, we're here, we can't see past there. We can't hear past there. So right here, focus. We've got this, right? So another thing I think that I help with my clients is, let's talk about our fear. What's going on? What's going on in your mind? Is our mind bogged up over here? Do we need to release that? Because sometimes once we release our feelings, our labor starts. I had a client one time, a VBAC after C-section mom, actually, and we were in her living room and we got pots. And I got a piece of paper and we had all of her fears and all of her doubts and all of her negative things that she was feeling because she didn't feel like she could vocally say them, which I think is totally fine and normal. She wrote them all down and we processed each and every single one of them. Right? And so we went through each one and we talked about, one, what are we feeling? Two, why are we feeling that way? And three, why can that feeling go away? How can that feeling go away? And we did like the opposite, right? The positivity part of it. And then she burnt it. Physically, watched it burn and let it go in the pot. You guys, I cannot even tell you what happened to her body after we finished this. And with each one, she would be like, oh, like she was like stopping more. She was becoming audible. And I was like, yes, this is happening. Her body released that, that oxytocin again because everything was going away. All of that negativity that was stomping her oxytocin, going away.
It went away. And that actually, I loved the book, The VBAC Companion, and I pulled a quote from it, which is perfect for your statement. The journey to a VBAC is not just physical, it is deeply emotional and spiritual. It's about healing, reclaiming, and moving forward with strength and courage.
Yes. Oh, look, can you guys see my arms right now? Like standing, can you see those chills? Oh my goodness. Yes. Seriously, there's so much that comes with VBAC. And it makes me emotional thinking about it because I hate so badly that it has to be so difficult. I hate it. I hate that it has to be so mental because we've been stomped on, right? But it is what it is. That is a fact. It is harder to navigate through and it can be very emotional, but you can get through it. You can. And I want to point out too that like VBAC isn't right for everybody. Like we were talking about that before. Like my best friend, she had no desire to ever VBAC or even explore the idea of VBAC, which is totally okay. And I think that with the VBAC Link, what we try to do is educate on both sides so people know their options on both sides and can make the best choice for them. So it is spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical. There's such this journey. And in the end, you have to dial in to what you as an individual need for your birth, for your life, for whatever. What is your body saying? What is your mind saying? What is your heart saying?
I love that, Meagan. And I feel like that's the premise of our podcast, is to find the best birth for you, what that looks like. And you were a great example of showing how each birth was a little bit better. Your second cesarean was better than your first. And I think that's the goal, is just to get to a place where you are happy with that birth and you've done all that you can do. You've got the education, you have backup plans, and just the support you need to continue.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me what my goal as a doula is. And, I always just tell people to help people have the best experience that they can have, no matter the outcome. No matter the outcome. Even if it's a cesarean, even if it's an assisted delivery, whatever that outcome is, we want to try to help that be the best outcome, for the best experience for them, no matter the outcome.
Meagan, thank you so much. You are an inspiration. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and I hope that our listeners can find all of the resources, the education, the services that you're providing at the VBAC Link. We will have some links in our show notes that will lead people to you. Are there any other resources or tips that you want to share with us before we close today?
So resources, I would say we have actually a private community on Facebook that I think is such an amazing place to be, because we're a whole bunch of like-minded people who are also looking to see what the best option for them is. So you can find it at the VBAC Link community on Facebook. If you don't answer all the questions, you don't get in, just saying. We just will not tolerate anybody that doesn't accept all the rules. My biggest thing is I want to tell people that you can. So there are a lot of people that say you can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't do this, whatever. Or I will let you do this. If you don't want to do something, don't do it. You can do what is best for you. Stand up for yourself. You deserve it. No matter what that is.
Thank you, Meagan. Well, before we close our podcast, I have Haley, who is from our mom squad, and we just have a secret that she is wanting to share. And she says, while birth plans are awesome, be prepared for anything, just like we touched on in the interview. She had a high-risk pregnancy, so she was in and out of appointments, unsure if she would have the baby that day or if they could wait one more week. But she was prepared for anything, and that it wouldn't go according to plan. But like you said, as long as you have those resources, as long as you have thought through the things and got the education, it'll be okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that she said that. That really is, be prepared for anything.
Meagan, thank you so much for joining us on the Best Birth podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.